Welcome to Total Reviews, the web show where we take a look at games of interest and see if they are really worth a purchase, in partnership with Gamesplanet, where you can purchase games like this title from an officially licensed game seller. My choice of game today is the 2016 title Motorsport Manager by Playsport Games and Sega. As some of you may know, the Manager title and Sega go back a long way, with the Football Manager games and before that the Championship Manager series, something I used to play when I was pretty small. Well, by play, I mean attempt to work out what everything did, and even back then it was pretty highly detailed, so I was more like clicking here, clicking there, working out what I could do, what I couldn't do, and then playing along, learning from that. So really, play may not have been the same, may not be the right word. The right word probably is experiment. Yeah, something I used to experiment with when I was pretty small. So, anyway, given that Sega have a history for this, and the fact that I am more than just a passing fan of motorsport, I think I've watched more races than I can count. Over 250 Grand Prix, NASCAR races, IndyCar, World Touring Car Championship, Rally, World Championship Rally, yeah. I've watched a lot of races, but I have had high expectations for Motorsport Manager. But before all of that, before I talk about Motorsport Manager even more, the specifications. Available on Windows, Mac OS X and Steam OS/Linux, I'm going to quickly rattle off all the numbers of each one at minimum settings. Windows systems require Windows 7 64-bit as minimum, with the Mac needing OS X 10.10 and Linux requiring Ubuntu 14.04 or above, or the Steam OS. Now interestingly, all the systems require identical hardware specs, with an Intel Core 2 Duo processor running at 2.5 GHz or an AMD equivalent, 4 GB of RAM and a simple integrated graphics card. So, as long as you have 16 GB of hard drive space, you'll be just fine. From the official Steam page, I now read: the ultimate management game for fans of motorsport. Feel the thrill of race day, react in real time and make split-second decisions to gain an edge on your rivals. Master advanced technology to customize every aspect of your car's performance. Create a top racing team comprised of drivers, managers, mechanics and engineers. Step into a living, breathing world of motorsports with you at the center. Have you got what it takes to become the manager of a high-performance motorsport team? Motorsport Manager is a highly detailed, best-in-class management game for fans of motorsport. You'll hire the drivers, build the cars, and embed yourself in the dynamic world of racing. Every single detail will need to be considered in order to push your way to the championship title. Split-second decisions on the racetrack combined with carefully laid pre-race plans, everything from building and customizing your car to race day tactics, will affect your path to either ultimate victory or epic failure. Stop watching, start winning, and take control as the manager of your own motorsport team. Now that's actually quite rousing. Wow, that really makes you feel quite, yes, this sounds good. I want to do this. It's going to get me really into the nitty-gritty. So it's time to break all that down. First of all, the footage you see on the screen does have one visual mod on it that has real sponsors, which is available in the Steam Workshop and really does add to the immersion. So if you are thinking of purchasing this title, this is the #1 mod to download with it. Navigating the main menu was easy enough, and to be honest, setting everything up for a game was really simple. In the footage, I've set up my own team and started right at the bottom in what is essentially the GP3 series. Obviously, they haven't got the official sponsors, or the official licenses, so they can't call it GP3, GP2, or now it's called F2 and F1. So they have to call it whatever Asian Super Cup or whatever they call it. European, I think it's European Racing Series, Asian Super Cup, and World Motorsport Championship, or something like that. That's off the top of my head. I didn't look into that. But getting into the game, my first thoughts were very positive. They looked like there were loads of things to do, from designing parts to preparing for races to hiring staff, just like it said on the Steam page. And what I really liked about it as I played was it felt very much like a Football Manager game, in the fact that you had a race weekend which would equate to the football match, and you had the day-to-day running of the team, which then in this involves scouting drivers, managing finances, choosing sponsors, running politics, giving interviews and more like that. In Football Manager, that was essentially the same thing actually: scouting football players, giving interviews, dealing with tactics, designing new tactics, working with the team, and all that kind of stuff. So it's very similar in that aspect. It does give it a feel of being in an alive world, but I did have a few issues with it. I'll get back to that later though, because the best part of this title by far is the on-track action itself. Sadly, like I said, because there's nothing officially sponsored, none of the real tracks are in here, but if you take a look at them, you really can work out what track is related to what, as well as the teams up in the higher formulae. When you're on track, as long as you were pretty good with your time, you could have a decent amount of time to dial in setup during practice. Changing around gear ratios, front and rear wing angles, messing around with suspension setups is all crucial to extracting the most performance from the car. However, what did seem to be missing was factoring the driving style of a specific driver. Changing out parts changed how the car needed to be set up. But both drivers and your reserve seem to like the exact same setup, which didn't make too much sense to me. Now I know from experience, I personally like a car that has a bit more oversteer, it's a bit more fidgety under braking. I prefer that kind of car that's then fidgety under braking, more stable under power as you're coming out of a corner. Some people prefer it to be more stable under braking and then wanting to step out as you come out of a corner or stuff like that. So drivers do have an effect, but it didn't seem to have an effect in here. But that's just that. The race itself was very dynamic. I mean, with the chance of rain, you had different tyre choices, pit stop strategies and refueling if you were allowed. And I like how you have to think on the spot, particularly if you've just started your own team, because you're not going to get very far without some pretty bold and daring calls. And of course, if you get it wrong, you're going to end up right at the back of the grid. Sad times. But if you got it right, then you really had something to smile about, particularly when you found yourself switching onto the tyres at the right time or conserving them at the right time. This, however, leads me to a very interesting issue. Looking at the whole interface that you can see on the screen right now, you can see there's a vast amount of information on the screen, and whilst all that is absolutely brilliant, I want to focus down where your drivers are. It's possible to tell your driver to push or conserve the tyres, as well as tell them to switch their engine into a higher mixture or not. Now this is great, except for the fact that in real life you would not be telling them to be constantly switching these things. They would be judging that for themselves, and then they'd be making the appropriate calls. For example, if you're low on fuel, you would hardly expect the driver to keep pushing even when told to do so. They would clearly back off somewhat, because they'll be like, hang on a minute, I don't care what the team's telling me, I know, I can see in the car that I am low on fuel, I'm not going to make it to the end of the race. So I have to back off, I've got to do something. Similarly, they'd do the same on tyres. So in the sense, this is a little bit too much like micromanaging. I'd like to see an option where you can tell them to do whatever they see fit, and then allow us to have an override, which then we say, okay, look, we want you to push now for X number of laps. So let's say he's doing whatever he needs to do, and then for 2 laps you tell him push as hard as you can. So then they will absolutely push, and then after that go back to whatever you're doing. So they'll push when they're close to someone, they'll conserve their tires when they're a little bit away from someone, so on and so forth, just to add that extra dynamic sense to the actual race and to make it more realistic. Also, the pit stops, they felt like a bit of a crazy gamble. Mistakes were being made far too often for my liking. And sure, it does create an additional layer to the gameplay, but it made it feel a little bit too artificial. Overall though, the race day experience is pretty enjoyable, and it really does have you constantly thinking to see if you can get the jump on your rivals in any way, and just with anything you can. Back out of the race experience though, this is where I find Motorsport Manager to be lacking in some departments. The politics votes, absolutely fine, I quite like them. You can choose between changing rules for next season, which is safety cars, virtual safety cars, longer races, shorter races, qualifying, longer practice, different types of tyres, different tyre compounds, different tyre allocation you can even choose. It depends on what comes up on the vote. Different track layouts as well, or different tracks full stop. I think that's actually quite cool. And you can change different engines, or whether they're spec engines, whether you can do development on the engines, whether you're adding energy recovery systems into them, whether you're adding DRS systems into them, all that kind of stuff, which is very, very impressive. I liked that whole politics side of it. It made it feel like you were the manager of a team, you were the team principal, and you were doing something to influence the sport, to influence your championship. So that's pretty cool. The HQ upgrades are also just fine. They allow you to give better types of equipment through research and development and the like. You can get better brakes and all that kind of stuff by getting a brake department, or a wind tunnel for better aerodynamics, or a racetrack for better testing, and so on and so forth. That's not bad at all. I like that as well. But it is primarily the design itself, that designing section, that bugs me, and the lack of communication you have with your driver on a day-to-day basis. Starting with the design, you have options to create new parts, most of which are brakes, engine, gearbox, suspension, front and rear wing, should you be able to develop any or all of them, depending on the rules of the championship. You can apply perks to them, which are down to how much experience you have in building the part, how many of these parts you have built, as well as the lead engineer. Beyond that, there really isn't anything you can do with regards to influencing the design. Take the brakes, for example. You cannot advise them to build brakes with thicker pads or discs, or a larger radius, or having cross-drill vents, or slotted discs, or whatever. What you would be changing in real life that would then be changing the property of the said brakes with the wear and the cooling and the force that you could apply. That's annoying for me, because I can't do that, and I want to do that. Similarly, onto the communications aspect, there's no real way of talking to drivers between races and saying, well, look, I want you to focus on improving such and such ability. I want you to focus on your braking, your ability to improve your cornering. Yes, sometimes the drivers will come to you occasionally and say, oh, which one do you want me to do? Do you want me to be, for example, a first lap hero, or do you want me to be a late breaker? And then you do that, and it just adds this trait to them. But you can't tell them on a day-to-day basis. So say, oh, look, for the next 3 weeks, I really think you should focus on your cornering, because your cornering wasn't so good in the first 3 races or something. You can't do that. And that's, I don't like the fact that you can't do that. That's not good. Lastly, the only people you can seemingly hire are 2 drivers and a reserve, a lead designer, 2 mechanics, and a scout. And that's really simplified. And coming from the world of Football Manager, another Sega title, it's just dull. It's just really dull. It's Football Manager. You can hire physios, scouts. Obviously you've got all the different types of football players, but you've got all the different scouts that you can hire. You've got the physios, so you've got goalkeeping scouts. You've got midfielders, defender. Sorry, not scouts. Instructors. Trainers, whatever you call them, coaches, that's the right word, coaches. You can hire an assistant manager, you can hire this, that and the other. They need something like that in here. Hiring a mechanic that specializes in aerodynamics, hiring a mechanic that specializes in brakes, hiring a mechanic that specializes in so on and so forth. And that would really, really add to this. Overall, this is a title that I hope will be the start of a string of fantastic titles, each more in-depth than the last, the same way that other management style games have had and have been. Whilst there are many things right with this game, it feels as though in many ways it's just a foundation for more to come. The fact that there is nothing else currently like it available on the market means that it is the go-to title if that's what you're looking for. And it's not bad. It's not a bad game. It really does have an enjoyment factor, particularly, like I said, on race day. But I have no doubt that there is so much more that can be done with this, so I give this a 7.5 out of 10, or 75 out of 100, primarily for originality and a good solid foundation that I really want to see built upon. And if you want to purchase this game, then click in the link in the description box below to go to Gamesplanet and support this channel in the process. I think it's worth a purchase if you really like motorsports, but you don't want to be going too much in the nitty-gritty. If you like this review, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you guys in another video of Total Reviews.